Awareness is the key to taking back control of your life. Internal awareness, awareness of what you see and hear and feel on the inside, because everything that you do out there is driven by what's happening in here. But most of us don't like to look in here because we're afraid of what we might find. When you stay focused on the external, you are naturally in a powerless place. Things happen to you. So many of the men I talk to have had this experience, right? The divorce happened to you. You didn't want it and you couldn't stop it. And it's so easy to get stuck in this place of feeling helpless. Like there's not anything you can do. And not only did this horrible thing happen to you, but in the process, maybe it took your identity as a husband, as a father, as a partner away from you. And it also left you with all of these doubts about who you are, all of these fears that maybe you are a narcissist, maybe you are emotionally abusive, maybe you are insensitive, maybe you are lacking in some way as a husband, as a partner. So of course you don't want to look inside, because if you look inside, if you become aware of your internal experience, one, you're going to find a lot of pain, and two, maybe you're going to find out that your ex-wife was right, that you are all of these horrible, inadequate things that she might have suggested that you are, either through her words or her actions. And yet it is awareness that has the power to set you free from all of that pain. Most of the men I speak to after their divorces are focused on trying to understand the external, trying to understand what happened, what went wrong, why she made the choices she made. And they feel like if they could just understand it all, if they could make sense of it, then they could accept it. And they could avoid doing the same thing in the future, avoid the same situation. But that doesn't actually work. And if you've been through this yourself, I think you know that. Because they'll say, I'm confused and I don't understand, but in the same breath, they're like, well, I do understand. Right? I do know what I did. I do know some of the role I've played. I've come to terms with that. I can see her actions. But I just don't understand how she could do this. Or even though I understand some of that, I just feel so awful. And there's a very simple reason for this. The part of the brain that does the understanding, the logical, rational, analytical part of your brain that lives in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it's like up here. That part of the brain does not have a direct neural connection to the limbic system, which is the seat of emotions. It cannot communicate with your amygdala. Right? So there is no emotional impact. You can't communicate with that more subconscious emotional brain through understanding, logic, or reason. This is why many people who have gone through something difficult like a divorce feel like there's such a disconnect, like there's two parts of them, right? There's the rational, logical part that gets it, and then there's this emotional part that is just in so much pain and confusion and struggle. And it's just because those two parts of the brain can't talk. But there is a part of your conscious mind that does have a direct line of communication to the limbic system, to those primal brainstem parts that create your emotions, that drive your inner experience. And that is the medial prefrontal cortex. It's the part of your brain that is responsible for awareness. So it has that part of your brain that lets you watch what's happening in your body and be conscious of your own thoughts, of your own feelings. That part of your conscious mind has a direct channel, a direct line of communication to the seat of your emotional internal experience. That is hugely powerful. I cannot overemphasize this enough. If you can talk, if your conscious brain can start to talk to your emotional brain, that means you can regulate it. You can start to change your internal experience on purpose if you can get in there and talk to it. But you cannot do that through rational, logical, reasoning, analytics, the seeking to understand every little detail and why and how. That's never going to get you there, because that part of your brain can't talk. It does not have that radio channel. The awareness part does. And so awareness becomes really, really powerful. What am I talking about with internal awareness? I'm talking about watching what's happening on the inside. What do I feel? How do I know I feel it? What am I thinking? Where is that thought coming from? Why do I think that thought so often? Right? How is the thought connected to the feeling? And how do I actually show up in the world when I'm living from that internal experience? Those are all within the realm of awareness. It's watching and understanding on an emotional level as opposed to on a rational level. But a lot of people don't like to do this because it hurts. And it's scary because to become aware of an emotion, you have to sit in an emotion and watch it. We don't like to do that. We'd rather put on Netflix or drink a beer or eat something or talk to somebody. Right? We're constantly distracting ourselves from our own awareness of our own internal experience because we're afraid of what we're going to find. And one of the reasons we're afraid of what we're going to find is that we think whatever is happening in there on the inside means something about who I am. Right? If I go in there and I find all of these ugly emotions, if I find jealousy and rage and shame and guilt and anger, right? I find all of these negative feelings. Well, that means I'm that kind of person. I'm an angry person, I'm a jealous, it means something about who I am. And that's why we don't look. If I go in and I find all these horrible thoughts about what I want to do to my ex-wife or to her new boyfriend, or all of these terrible doubts about myself, well, then that's part of who I am. Right? We think that our internal experience defines us, so we're scared to look at it. And what we end up doing is just living in this default mode where we're constantly living from the same internal experience that we have no control over, and it's impacting everything we do out in the world, and our lives really are not under our control at all. The magic of awareness is when you start to watch that internal experience. One of the things you learn is that the internal experience has very little to do with you and with who you are, because the internal experience comes from your thoughts, your beliefs, which are just thoughts that you've thought so much you don't really think them anymore, and the emotions connected to them. But when you start watching, you'll realize that those thoughts aren't you, those beliefs aren't you. They're just the stories you've picked up over your lifetime based on your experiences and the things you've been exposed to. And they're linked to these emotions, and you have this whole crazy internal experience, but you're watching it. And if you're watching the thought and you're watching the feeling, it means that you're not the thought and you're not the feeling. You're the witness to them. You've been carrying them around, you've been practicing them a lot, but now here you are watching them. And as you start to watch and you sit with the feeling and you're brave enough to lean into the pain and experience it, you start to realize that just because you've thought that way before doesn't mean you have to keep thinking and believing the same things in the future. Right? You start to notice, in fact, that you don't. You believe one thought one moment and a very different thought the next. You feel something one moment and something very different the next. And you start to separate who you are from what you hear and see and feel on the inside. That's where your freedom starts to come in. Because if you're not defined by these things, well, then you can look at them. You can be curious about them. You can understand them. And as you understand them on this awareness, emotional level, you can start to change them. Awareness is so powerful. It is really crazy. It's not until you become aware of the fact that your beliefs, your thoughts are optional, that they drive your emotions, and that those emotions, that internal emotional experience impacts everything you do in the world. When you start to see the link between all of those things and you watch it happening, you start to realize that you could just step out of that. You could believe a different belief, you could feel a different feeling, and when you do those things, you can show up in the world in a very different way. And now you get to choose, who do I want to be? How do I want to be? It's not defined by my internal experience. My choice of who I want to be is what's going to create a different internal experience. But we can't do any of that until you already have the awareness. Because right now, if you haven't had that awareness yet, if you haven't taken the time to really sit with and watch your internal experience, you're probably scared of it. Because you're scared of what it means about you. And as long as that internal experience is linked in your mind to your identity, to your sense of who you are, it's going to be really daunting to go in and look at it. So awareness takes, above all, courage and then curiosity, a desire to watch and witness your own life from the inside out. And if you can do that consistently, you don't have to do it all the time, right? You don't have to live in your internal experience and your pain and your suffering and watching it all of the time. But if you can do it for 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, maybe an hour a day, where you just really watch and are curious, what am I feeling? How do I know? What does that do in my body? How does that move me in the world? How does it impact how I show up? And where is it coming from? What is the belief? What is the fear? Where did I learn to believe that and feel that? And how does it play out in my life? If you spend a little bit of time being brave enough to sit in that space instead of distracting or buffering or numbing to get away from it, that awareness will start to set you free. And in that freedom, you get to take back control of your life. because the awareness communicates directly with the emotional brain. So the more aware you are, the more power you have to shift your internal experience. And when you can start to actively, intentionally control what you see and hear and feel on the inside, well then what you do out here in the world, it could be anything, right? The options are limited only by your imagination.